Hello world! Welcome and welcome back to the channel! So today's video is something nobody asked for, but nonetheless an idea I've been planning for at least a year in advance, which was to create a group of characters as part of a hypothetical 2D platformer idea I have. As you were probably able to tell from looking at the thumbnail, the concept for this game is pretty out there, and the events that inspired its creation are incredibly stupid, but just stay with me for a second. So the idea behind this game came from a silly conversation that ended up snowballing wildly out of control. About 2 years ago, there was an announcement for a Mermaid Melody Kuji in which you could win a special illustration, and I thought the promo art for 𝚜𝚎𝚎 in particular looked weirdly familiar. I did some digging, and sure enough, her pose bore a strong resemblance to a render of Donkey Kong from Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, and I could not unsee it anymore. I posted this groundbreaking discovery onto a Mermaid Melody channel and a Magical Girl Discord server I'm on, and other people started contributing various images of fictional characters flexing to stack on top of the original joke, up to and including some Mario Party artwork of Wario.
Oh my God!
What have I done? After I was able to stop laughing uncontrollably, I was left with the idea of a 2D platformer that combined gameplay elements from both Donkey Kong Country and Wario Land 4, and was also loosely a spiritual successor to Mermaid Melody starring a buff magical girl. So yeah, everything about this game is silly and dumb, and I kind of abandoned the idea not long after I came up with it, but for some reason I find myself still really attached to these characters I conceptualized for it, so I knew I had to dedicate a video to me giving them proper designs and sharing this weird idea with the rest of the internet. Maybe this all stems from my frustration over how underrepresented magical girls are in video games and my desire to see more magical girls in this medium. Like, most of these magical girl games out there have characters licensed from popular magical girl series, and the vast majority of those licensed games are puzzle games with the magical girl skin on them, basically. Obviously, not every magical girl game is like this, and there are some entries that stand out in their respective fandoms as being really good. I just think it's unjust that magical girls don't have a bigger footprint in the gaming sphere, because there are certain genres that I think would work perfectly within the structure of a magical girl story, specifically Metroidvanias and platformers, and they just aren't getting made. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox for now. Let's talk about what it is I'm currently drawing. So, my guiding light for designing the main character for this game was to create a magical girl evocative of other game protagonists like Donkey Kong, Wario, Peppino, and Dynamite Anton by having her be very physically strong and powerful, while also combining those elements with magical girl aesthetics. My intention was to have her be kind of Sakura Ogami coded, where her appearance makes her look very masculine and intimidating, but not at the expense of her having traditionally feminine sensibilities, which informed a lot of the decisions I made for this character. I wanted to combine the incongruencies of her being cute, like you'd expect a typical magical girl to be, but she also happens to be extremely muscular. I've become really attached to this idea of her personality being a deconstruction of a typical cutesy moe main character type anime girl, where instead of her being endearingly clumsy like you would expect this archetype to be, she finds herself in awkward scenarios because she just doesn't know her own strength, like for example ripping a door clean off its hinges when she intended to open it gently. Normally I don't calculate how many heads tall a character is before I start drawing them and just go off of vibes, but this time I made an exception in order to bring this character closer to the other video game protagonists she was inspired by, who are usually drawn in a very compact and stocky manner, which also gave the added bonus of accentuating her cuteness attributes by making her look more chibi-esque. At some point during this process, I was possessed by the urge to pursue a dessert gimmick for the characters, so naturally I took the low-hanging fruit and based my angel character off of cake, you know, like angel fruit cake, and this is also the basis for the name I chose for her, which is Buttercream. The theming actually helped me out a lot when designing her costume, as there are so many ways one could draw a magical girl angel, so I intentionally set my sights on making her dress look like a cupcake wrapper. The bottom half of the dress is shaped like a pearl border piping on a cake, the wave of her hair is shaped like icing, and the decorations on the side of her head are meant to resemble Easter eggs. When assembling my mood board for Buttercream, I intentionally sought out anime angel art that was specifically created in the early 2000s, and I tried to design her based on those sensibilities, and I'll go into more detail about why I narrowed my scope to this specific era of online art once I get to the process for my second character in this video. But for Buttercream specifically, I can definitely see quite quite a bit of influence from 𝚘𝚘𝚕𝚔 and her outfit. This did create an additional challenge for me because these kinds of angel outfits are very loose and flowy, and that would have obscured the form of Buttercream's musculature underneath, which I didn't want to happen. Especially since the chibi style I chose to draw her in would make her body type less pronounced already, so I simplified a lot of design elements I had previously planned to add and basically approached her costume as if it were some type of magical girl muscle shirt. You can even see a part where I took a break from the drawing and wrote some notes to myself that included turning the lace on her clothes into rips so I wouldn't forget to change that detail once I got back to work, and I think that helped out a lot. When it came to Buttercream's colors, my first instinct was to use a predominantly white and gold color scheme and give her blonde hair, which I strongly wanted to pair with light blue skin, probably due to subconscious influence from the light fairy dolls design from Neopets. I wanted to try out some different things with the coloring process of these OCs, namely by using a simpler rendering style reminiscent of the 2D artwork from the Wario Land games, as well as picking colors from a limited palette reminiscent of a Game Boy Advance. This ended up being a lot more difficult than I thought it would be, mostly because the colors I kept choosing were really similar in value to each other, and I did end up cheating a little bit by adjusting the brightness of Buttercream's skin. Her clothes still weren't feeling right to me, but everything clicked once I made the decision to add a rainbow pattern to the main body of her dress. Not only did it solve the problem I was having of there not being enough contrast in the hues, but it also ties in with an extra sprinkling of lore I came up with for Buttercream later on in the process, which will become more relevant as we discuss other characters in this lineup. So with that being said, let's move on to our next cast member for this concept game so we can get to those details even sooner. For my second character in this lineup, of course, I had to go the super obvious route and give the angel character a devil companion. Since Buttercream is an angel with a cake theme, I thought I could give my devil character an ice cream gimmick as a little tip of the hat to Tomoko Kawase, and I decided on specifically theming him after Neapolitan flavor ice cream, from which his name Napori-chan is derived. Having already settled in this angel-devil dichotomy from the beginning, this in turn led to me choosing the specific era I did for my character design references, as I feel like this specific theme is such a hallmark of late 90s, early 2000s culture that rubbed off on nearly every DeviantArt artist who came of age during that time period. Come on, don't even try to deny that you had a half angel, half devil OC or angel and devil ship when you were a teenager. Admit it. Nowadays, if you try to do the same thing, people would think you were being ironic or cringe, but for this concept game, I decided to harken back to that culture of internet art history since I thought it contributed to the themes of nostalgia that magical girls and 2D platformers are bringing their own flavors up to the table. Right away, I had a very strong mental image of what I wanted his design to look like before I actually started drawing him, and as a result, his mood board ended up being a lot more sparse and disorganized compared to Buttercream's, where in her case I had to look outward a lot more in order to find inspiration. The jumping off point for Napori-chan's creation was to have an incubus or sleep paralysis demon who was in a chronic state of sleepiness, in direct contrast to Buttercream's energetic attitude, and I took that idea and ran with it. I gave him a nightcap that transformed into horns, which I added cracked eggs to the tips of in place of pom-poms to tie him back to Buttercream, one piece full body pajamas with a back flap for his ponytail to come out from, and fuzzy slippers shaped like hooves. Digitogrid legs were a totally unnecessary part of his design, but one that I couldn't resist adding. I also gave him a neck ruffle that I colored in Neapolitan colors as a reference to the devilish harlequin archetype, but I don't know if that makes him look too much like a jester or not. I made the cuffs of his sleeves and cap fuzzy as a reference to the texture of the edge of an ice cream scoop, and I originally intended to color those areas like Neapolitan ice cream, but I was worried it would blend in too much with his horns, so I sadly left that part out. In contrast with the easy time I had designing Napori-chan, I wasn't entirely sure what kind of purpose he was supposed to serve in this game when I first created him. My original idea was that he would basically serve as a checkpoint marker like Professor Chops in Donkey Kong Country, but it felt like a bit of a disservice to give him the role of managing a game mechanic or offering tutorials and not allowing him to be his own distinct character. So then I imagined his role being more in line with something like Professor Egad from the Luigi's Mansion games, where he's there to help the player but for the most part does his own thing. Eventually I was able to come up with an idea that I like better, that harkened back to another Donkey Kong Country mechanic as well as classic magical girl tropes. So a common feature in DKC games are the animal friends, who each have their own abilities that will help the Kongs in defeating enemies, and this specific concept was given a special twist by way of the titular masks found in Kaze and the Wild Masks, an indie game that's very heavily inspired by Donkey Kong Country. On the magical girl side of things, I knew I didn't want Buttercream to primarily rely on weapons to fight and to instead have the vehicle for all of her attacks be magical martial arts. To be fair, there is precedence for magical girls having some unarmed attack methods such as Sailor Moon's Sailor Moon Kick and Cure Lovely's Lovely Punchy Punch, but to increase the challenge and overall gameplay variety, I thought about various weapons for our magical girl to use across different levels and have them function the same way as the animal friends, with Napori-chan being the one who provides those weapons for her, and there are specific levels you can find him in where he's napping on the job as a sleep paralysis demon. The basic premise behind Napori-chan's personality is that, in accordance with him being a demon, he does have evil desires, but because of his perpetual lethargy, he's just too dang tired to act on his intentions. So while he and Buttercream would normally be enemies, the two of them get along reasonably well because Napori-chan never does anything remotely bad. However, he does recognize that Buttercream is strongly motivated to finish some kind of task, and he tries to piggyback on that by giving her side quests to do evil tasks on his behalf that he knows he should do himself but is too tired to get around to finishing. Buttercream can accept these side quests, but of course she never brings harm to anyone and basically does something helpful and positive for the target of Napori-chan's intentions instead. That after the side quest mission is completed, Napori-chan gives Buttercream a reward anyway before going back to sleep because he's definitely not about to take the time to investigate whether or not Buttercream is being honest. This takes us to the end of Napori-chan's reference sheet, so let's let him go back to sleep and check our next character. Last but not least, every platformer needs a villain, so allow me to introduce you to Queen Verona. So this is where I really began kicking things into high gear in terms of planning this game's lore, because just like how Donkey Kong Bananza is allegedly a retelling of Dante's Inferno, Buff Angel Buttercream's narrative is inspired by a very specific Greek myth. According to Wikipedia, one legend says that Hera, queen of the gods, persuaded the sirens to enter a singing contest with the Muses. The Muses won the competition and then plucked out all the sirens' feathers and made crowns out of them. Out of their anguish from losing the competition, writes Stephanus of Byzantium, the sirens turned white and fell into the sea at Aptera, where they formed the islands in the bay that were called 𝚤𝚘𝚗. With this in mind, I wanted the opening scene to have Buttercream participating in a singing contest against the game's in-universe version of the 9 Muses, but ends up losing unfairly, not because Buttercream is a worse singer than the Muses, but due to the Muses not liking Buttercream's style of singing. Considering Buttercream was partially inspired by a Tommy February 6 song, I guess she's into pop music. Afterwards, Queen Verona tells the Muses to use their powers to take away Buttercream's feathers so they can obtain the prizes, which are the crowns made out of those feathers, a process that drains all of the color out of Buttercream, and now with her wings plucked, she takes a long hard fall out of the sky before eventually crash landing. The object of the game is Buttercream reclaiming what has been taken from her and gradually gaining back the pieces of her wings and colors with every defeat of the 9 Muses, who are the bosses of the game, before advancing to the final boss, which is Queen Verona. Originally I was going to design one of the Muses, but there was no way I could bring myself to choose just one, hence why I chose to draw Verona instead. In keeping with the unnatural skin tone theme, I knew I wanted this character to have green skin, mostly to set her apart from Buttercream and Napori-chan since their color schemes are on the warmer side, but because Buttercream and Napori-chan are based off sweets, so I thought choosing green as such a dominant color would be a good way to put Verona against them since that color is associated with healthy fruits and vegetables. Not only that, it tied in really well with the jealousy that is so strongly associated with Hera, so that was a happy coincidence. At some point I was hit with a bolt of inspiration from the blue to have her be entirely faceless, which is a quality I imagine the Muses having as well, and I think in Queen Verona's case, this combined with her green skin makes her resemble some kind of plant monster and makes her look even more intimidating. It wasn't my first intention, but I think her not having a face symbolizes her envy, like she's so distracted by how other people are threatening her self-esteem that she doesn't even have her own identity. Another color associated with jealousy is yellow, particularly in the language of flowers, so I wanted this character's name to be the same as a particular shade of yellow, and Verona Green was the perfect fit. It's also known by the names Green Earth and Terra Verde. The process of drawing this character was a lot of fun, but it didn't necessarily start out that way because there were so many choices I had to make when I was trying to figure out what direction I wanted to take her design in. My initial impulse was to base her design heavily off of artistic depictions of Hera, and to be fair, there are still some remnants of that which made their way into the look I ultimately chose. The design for Queen Verona's belt was inspired by the plan for the Temple of Hera. There are lots of references to pomegranates sprinkled throughout her design, which Hera sometimes depicted as holy, and because one of Hera's sacred animals is a peacock, I fashioned Queen Verona's staff after a peacock feather. But like I alluded to earlier, I wanted this game to be inspired by a Greek myth without being a literal adaptation adaptation, so it wasn't in my interest to have Queen Verona look like another version of Hera. Because Hera is the goddess of marriage and queen of Mount Olympus, Queen Verona's costume took inspiration from wedding dresses, as well as from the designs of several malevolent monarchs from classic Disney movies, specifically the Queen of Hearts from Alice in Wonderland, Maleficent from Sleeping Beauty, and Grimhilda from Snow White. One of my first priorities was to consider how Queen Verona's design would play off against Buttercream and Napori-chan, as well as figure out how to make her look like she fitted with other platformer final bosses. It felt like the most obvious route would be to make her very tall, slim, angular, and sharp, considering the previous characters were very compactly drawn, and specifically Buttercream's build is more boxy, while Napori-chan is on the chubbier side. I wanted to add extra mass to Queen Verona, but I knew this would have to be limited to the outfit she was wearing, because if she was physically bulked out, she would feel too similar to Buttercream, and the first place my mind went to was to give her a long imposing cape with dynasty-style shoulder pads. It was important to me that Queen Verona's design communicated her personality, specifically the parts of her that would be equal parts intimidating and put off by Buttercream's preferred style of music. The image that appeared to me was one of conservatism, seriousness, austerity, and orderliness, so I actively made sure Queen Verona had a cutting edge to her that was very slick, immaculate, symmetrical, and professional, reminiscent of the Bauhaus art movement, formal business suits, 80s era Grace Jones, and so on. My goal was to have her embody the kind of character that would make you feel really intimidated if you ever visited her house, because she has everything so neat and tidy and you'd be terrified to get even one fingerprint on her glass coffee table or a piece of fuzz from your shirt on her freshly conditioned coyote pelt rug for fear of what she might do to you if she found out. So yeah, I had a lot of very different inspirations that I was drawing from when creating this character, and I had to find a way to make them all play nice with each other. Hopefully I was able to pull it off. I know I'm really happy with how she turned out either way. Here they all are, the completed lineup of the 3 characters I designed for this video. When I first got the idea for Buff Angel Buttercream, I was really excited about it for a while and considered the possibility of being made into a real game, but as time went on I lost interest in the project and abandoned it for a year until I picked it back up again so I could make this video. Now being able to see the main cast with my own eyes has made me love this game concept so much more now, and writing down the descriptions for this video even gave me some new inspiration. I feel bad for abandoning this idea now. I even thought about drawing a pixel art fake screenshot for the game, but I ended up running out of time to do so and just focused on the character sheets. Maybe some other time. On that note, it's time for me to shut this video down. Make sure to get Boba Cat some pats, snacks, and playtime before you log out, and head to the description of this video to find links for every other corner of cyberspace I'm on. Thanks for letting me chat with you, and until next time, should I bring Buff Angel Buttercream back?